My name is Dedrick Bonds. I am a native of Georgetown, born and raised. Born and raised here, a product of the Georgetown County Schools. Graduated from Georgetown High School in 1994. Went on to Morehouse College and graduated there with a degree in African American Studies. Matriculated at Clark Atlanta University in pursuit of the Master's in History there. And most recently, within the past year or so, took an MBA from Coastal Carolina University. I am a public school teacher and a nonprofit director. What is Gullah? Gola, as the original patois would have it pronounced, right? Gullah, as we now say. It is, what it represents to me first is survival. Survival. There were many challenges for West Africans that came through the triangular trade route, right? That made it to the Caribbean, then eventually to the shores of Charleston, that brought my people to Georgetown. They are survivors. The Gullah culture is one of a melting pot, if you will, of other cultures. And they're meshing together to create one culture that has sustained most of the African Americans that survived the treacherous route here to America. That's what Gullah is to me. The nature of water is important to the Gullah culture because it provides isolation, it provides sustenance. It ultimately gave Gullah people their own survival, their own means of survival, right? Again, Gullah is the meshing of several cultures. First, it would be the many cultures that came together on the western shores of Africa that populated the slave ships that came here. It would be the meshing of those African cultures with the Caribbean cultures, primarily the French and the Barbados, right? And then it would be the survival of both of those transmittal of cultures over to America to mesh with and create what then ultimately becomes the Gullah culture. It is, again, for me, it is about survival of a people. And it tells our story from one generation to the next. It's almost unfortunate that we are dying almost. The culture is dying. It is being appropriated. I can't necessarily say misappropriated, but it is being appropriated. I think it starts with the long-serving tenure of Congressman James Clyburn and his long fight for the establishment of a federal Gullah-Geechee corridor, right? It starts, I believe, in Florida, comes all the way up through Georgia, South Carolina, which most of our coastline is, and certain parts of the coastline in North Carolina. So that brought about a resurgence of the awareness of what Gullah culture is. Very interestingly enough, having been born and raised here and being of age, I can remember when it was almost shameful to be a representation of Gullah culture, because it was primarily through our way of speaking, our patois, right, that we were recognized. And so it was at one point almost a badge of shame. It is good now to see a positive resurgence in that respect, where it's not a badge of shame, but instead a badge of honor. But at what rate will we continue to exploit it for it to be recognized and not just survive, right? Gullah, many things to many people, the water, an important part of it. One thing I can say about this water experience is while many of us enjoy it for what it just naturally is, right? The ability to have a self-sustaining life, to marvel at God's creation. I would also like to think that it could also be a point of post-traumatic stress disorder for a lot of people of Gullah culture. We don't have a mastery of the water. We don't command the water, right? We don't have the affordability to get the toys of the water. And so there's still this veil that separates us and the water while we can still admire it for all of its natural beauty. Gullah culture, many things to many people. Culture to me, as I've learned it, is learned behavior. So while we're all family, we have learned our behaviors separately because of family associations or regional associations or territorial or political, whatever those motivating factors may be. Nevertheless, we're still family, right? So we still can identify the red rice when we sit down at the table. We've cooked it differently, but we know the end result is supposed to be the same. Gullah, Geechee, yeah, you know, again, it's their story to tell. It's their story to tell because each of us have that unique connection to the culture. Gullah, it's your story to tell. What is your connection to it, right? It's not to say that it is not deep, it is just not the same as mine. Joseph Hayne Rainey, the first African American elected to the United States House of Representatives, was born here and died here in Georgetown, South Carolina. Mr. Rainey was born in 1832 and served in the United States House of Representatives from 1870 to 1879. Mr. Rainey also had a very interesting history with water. He was conscripted during the Civil War as a blockade runner. And when he saw an opportunity to leave from Charleston, where he was living and working at the time, he and his wife, Susan Rainey, did so and escaped, if you will, to Bermuda. There, while in Bermuda, he was highly regarded and respected as a barber, as he was in Charleston before leaving. Mr. Rainey made a decent life for himself. And interestingly enough, when leaving Bermuda to come back to South Carolina, they took out an article in a local paper in Bermuda that thanked the natives of the island for their hospitality and their helping to make the Raineys a success. And then they came on back, first to Charleston, where he got involved in Republican politics, and then back in Georgetown, where he was eventually elected to the United States House of Representatives. The life of Mr. Joseph Hayne Rainey, perhaps one of our first most popular Gullah Georgetonians. So this house is the family home, not the birth home, I don't believe, but the family home of the Raineys. When Mr. Edward Rainey, Joseph's dad, got his freedom, I believe he was able to purchase this house as well. This is the house that Joseph returned to South Carolina broken for all intents and purposes, in spirit and almost financially, after having served in the United States House of Representatives, to take care of his father, who died shortly before Joseph did. I think there was about 3 years that separated the deaths of the father and the son, and both died here in this house. Now, Rainey did own property in Connecticut additionally, but this is where he resided when he died. We began to see the creation and the takeoff of what would become public education. And who is leading that fight for public education are the newly released slaves, or the newly released enslaved. They knew that for the longest of times, education was denied, and it wasn't just denied them, no, you can't have it. It was written in law that it was prohibited for them to learn. So once the end of chattel slavery had come, one of the first things that they did, besides satisfying the desire to officially become married in the recognition of family, was the pursuit of education. And Mr. Rainey, during his 9 years in the House of Representatives, was a strong proponent of the newly freed men gaining equity in education.